Hey, Martin.
Hi,
Hey,
good
how
to
was
see
your,
you.
yeah, you as well. How was your trip to San Francisco for the conference?
Pretty good. Yeah. I mean, I never really got over my jet lag, but
Yeah, yeah, of
I did enjoy
course.
being back.
Good deal. Good deal.
Hey,
Oh,
friends.
hey,
Hi.
Michael. Hey, Shane.
Uh, Oh, David, did you do a pull request? I merged them, but I didn't see yours so far. Let
Thought
me
I did
check.
one.
Yeah, I see it now.
Yep.
Let me just quickly merge it, just
Thank you,
for
sir.
bookkeeping.
Feeling people all good.
Yeah, are you feeling better?
Oh yeah, lot lots better. You should have seen Michael in the
Uh,
plane. He was wearing
I
his
was
mask and
dying.
nearly he was dying. Yes, he was.
So when I go to New York on the 4th to Glasgow Summit, uh,
Yep.
I will be doing vaccinations.
Yeah, that's smart.
It's
I'm I'm
it's
I'm
it's
I'm not I'm not actually sure mine like helped during this trip. I
yeah,
mean, I
yeah, I
think it
know.
was too like short. But having to skip the dinner the night before was probably what saved me.
Yes. But it's also like you're doing it yearly still, and I stopped it at like I also had 5 or 6 maybe, but then in Switzerland they don't do it anymore. And I didn't know. Like I talked to Andy, by the way, and he said it's still free in Australia.
Hmm.
You can just go into the. I mean, it's a bit far for the vaccination to travel there to get more free, but
Yeah.
uh,
Yeah.
Yeah,
but
but
if you're
there's
there,
return of investment is terrible if you fly to Australia just for the vaccinations.
yeah. But
Okay.
it really like I'm still like having coughs and my nose is still blocked a bit. So this, if you get really the flu or corona, it takes you out for 2 weeks. Like
Yeah.
horrible.
Yeah, that's
Oh,
why
Steven is here
I
as
got
well.
both vaccinations. Yeah.
Yes, and I was thinking that it's a bit expensive, 280 or something you said. Uh, and
Yeah.
in retrospect, I should have just anyway.
Okay. Hi,
Let me just
Steven.
merge.
Hi.
Hello, good to see y'all.
Yes, awesome. How's the Bay Area? Still good?
Yep.
Yeah,
Okay. I
I
think.
missed the Waymos. I mean,
Oh
that was
no!
incredible.
You
Ah,
didn't
you missed
write
them
one?
here.
Oh no, I did, but I mean I missed them here
Okay.
because
Yeah.
Yeah,
I
me
don't
too.
actually I don't have a license. Like I've never driven a car before, so this is sort of what I've been waiting for most of my life, and it works.
It does.
Yeah,
Um,
it's surprisingly good, right? And San Francisco
yeah,
is not the easiest city to drive in,
no,
Yeah.
but
and I felt really safe, like actually safer than I would with a human like Lyft
Yep.
driver.
yes,
You,
and like I have a Tesla, right? And I'm not feeling safe with autopilot, but but this is really good. Like
so how
it's
many
magic.
years until there's Waymo in every major city in the world? Or,
Well,
driverless
I
I'm not
taxis?
sure.
mean,
I think
outside,
legislation might be blocking it.
yeah, exactly. Outside of Europe, it's going to be very quick.
Yeah, the problem is in the EU we have a law that prohibits it at the moment, but they're working on that. Um, but like the Waymo, they basically are looking for an investor in Europe who would
Yeah.
shed like 500 million.
So if you have spare 500 million, Martin, you can have way more
And
in
you can,
Europe, and you can even say that Amsterdam is the first city to be in. You just have to spare a few hundred million.
Yeah. I mean, I don't
Okay.
think it's a great city for cars in general. Like maybe we need some like self-driving
Cycling.
bicycles. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Way more bicycle.
Yeah.
Okay. I
awesome.
think we are complete, right?
Is Eric also in? Let me check. Yes.
Yep.
Okay. Everybody is there. Okay, so let me remind you that by being here, we all agree to the GraphQL Spec membership agreement and to the GraphQL Foundation Code of Conduct. Today is the first meeting after a couple of weeks. And I have two topics I want to discuss. Pascal has another one. And then we can reorganize a bit that we have a plan forward to get the composition specification done. There are a lot of steps to do there. So the two agenda items I have for today is mainly to get you all back up to speed where we were in the batching specification. I did a couple of discussions with Benji today, and we advanced a bit more spec text there. And then also on the current composite spec, what we have done so far in the past couple of weeks, and what the next steps are. And Pascal and I discussed also to go over the enum merging rule, because this one is at the moment not like in Apollo Federation. So we should get a consensus on what we want to do there, and then also move forward on that. It's one of the merge rules. Is there anything else anybody wants to discuss today? If anybody has also some agenda items you want to discuss, please say so.
I had one
Okay.
initially, but I'm just going to, I
Yeah.
think we can retract it. We'll save it for maybe just a issue discussion offline if anyone wants to comment on an issue I opened. But
What can you say which it was? I read it
it was,
somewhere, but I forgot.
it came up from a discussion from the conference. I was talking with one of the attendees, and we were at a talk, and discussion came up about issue number 51 I created in the spec repo about deprecating key directives. It's not urgent. It's not something I think we need for the initial spec, but it was top of mind during the conference, and so I wanted to just make sure I copied it over. We don't, at this point, I think we
How do
can.
they mean?
Sorry, what was that?
We can, yeah. Let's discuss it. I mean, we have a couple of things, but I think there's space to discuss it here also, just to get an idea on that. Okay, let me just note that down. Okay, awesome. So I was discussing with Benji, like there was this the consensus that we had that we want to have one appendice to the GraphQL HTTP spec that handles all of batching. And I have started on the spec text there to integrate that fully, that we have, let me pull that actually up. Okay, Benji. Yeah, so the structure that we go for is basically introducing batching as a whole concept, then go into request batching, describe the variable batching that we already have, then show the combined usage of these two specification protocols. Then one thing Martin also wanted to have there is to show that we how incremental delivery would tie into that. What Benji also said is we should also integrate trusted documents into there. So if you use persisted queries, how would that play into that as well? And then also go more into details of how the execution flow in the GraphQL engine could be when done optimally. This is not, the last thing is not like a very where we want to go into detail, but it's more give a rough idea, like what steps could be optimized, for instance, in variable batching, to give some guidance on how you implement it best. One thing that Benji thinks is that we shouldn't do it as an appendice, but pull it into the main specification and have it there as optional to implement, but this would kind of also, from my side, make it more like if you look at the specification, you see that in the main specification is this part like with subscription, basically, you don't have to implement it. But because it's in the main document, like more people will probably implement it as when appendix is often overlooked. I don't know how the feeling
That makes
is
sense to
about
me.
that.
Yep.
Yeah, that's I think what we're going for. So we will inline it over the next couple of days, and then have just a spec section on that. What I also like, we discussed like when we looked at batching in the past, like with HTTP status code, it was very difficult because you basically sent in multiple documents and you basically ended up with a 200 of everything. And how we do it now is we validate, and so we pass and validate the whole bunch that we have, and then can return like validation errors, like 400 errors for the first section of validation. Basically, the full request must be valid before we start execution. That's also some of the feedback that we discussed today. And that then aligns well also with the main spec, where you have these 400 status codes when the request is not yet executed.
So I got one thing that also related to batching.
Yeah.
So in the discussion about the Nadel, right? Andy brought up a use case that, yeah, technically folks can have a query that returns you a list of stuff already. It takes a list of arguments and returns a list of stuff. So Marc-André also mentioned that this is actually might be a good idea to also technically look at that, right? So we have lookups, right? That gives you a product by ID, returns you a product, right? That's a lookup, that's our entry point, right? But what if we have products by IDs that takes a list of arguments? So list of IDs.
We did discuss that, yeah, but we actually landed on batching as the underlying mechanism, both to avoid sort of having to implement a multiple object finder, but also because the semantics aren't exactly optimal. Like with variable batching, we can actually deliver results out of order, and there is sort of a clear contract with if you would put the the batching in a single root field, you basically have to like deliver things in order. There would be unclear error semantics. So we felt this was the better solution to steer people towards.
I think the main issue is requires, right?
That as well. Yeah, you're right. Yep.
You cannot pass in multiple sets of variables for requires, and therefore if you want to, we do not need variable batching unless you have requires, because there you actually need it, or you do n+1 request, because you cannot send batches of arguments otherwise.
Yeah, I think the argument was that the more so that with the lookups, right, folks can use their existing graphs, right, and they may have the batching endpoints, right, so whether they can reuse it, but those are all that perfectly valid arguments against supporting that, and I totally agree with all that stuff. I just want to raise it up. That
we should probably discuss this in the specification, like explain the reasoning, because I do think like especially the require, like it's that's a breaking like breaking combination.
Like in Fusion, if you don't use requires, we can use these fields, but like it's very limited choice. I think if a gateway wants to implement this optimization, it's up to them. But we should. It's also like you could also go for alias batching, right? We will not stop you using that. It's not optimal.
Yeah, and it's also confusing because then as soon as you start using require, well, no, as soon as you formulate a query that sort of starts from that point and reaches a field that has require on it, and that's not even visible in the client schema. So it's sort of then you end up in a situation where arbitrary queries might sort of error out at runtime, and I think that's something we should like avoid at all costs. So I would actually argue we should explicitly keep this out. Yeah, like restrict lookup to single object lookups.
Totally. Yeah. As long as it's mentioned that this is specifically for because of the required and all those extra situations around it. That's why we don't want, those are not supported method of batching, because it just basically makes stuff much more unreliable.
Yeah.
The concern we would also have is, let's say you compose, ideally someone could compose a supergraph from one library and pass it. The goal is to be able to pass that to any implementation and it should still work. There's other optimizations, but it should still work, right? I could pass it to any Fedora compatible gateway. So if you compose a supergraph where you are using at lookup on a list root query, then like let's say Apollo router doesn't implement this, we don't have support for this, then your queries wouldn't work. Like that lookup wouldn't work, right? We'd have a runtime error because you composed it with, maybe our composition library would catch that for you because the directive location is technically valid, but like we got to look into the details of the field, and like maybe our composition library would catch that and yours like the spec one wouldn't. So that we have a bunch of issues. I think we should have make sure that the composition might have to directly indicate that, like, yes, the directive location can be on a field definition, but also the field definition must not be a list type for lookup. Like we might have to put that in composition rules.
Yes, this could be a we should, if we feel strongly about that, we should have a validation rule on that. And
I also think that even though technically alias batching would work, I would also, I'm not sure if we should add this to the specification as well.
No.
That
it's because you would have the alias for the lookup and alias for the require. That gets very, very confusing. Very
yeah,
hard.
That's the reason why we should explicitly say alias batching is a very, very bad idea. Like you run into so many issues if you do alias batching. It's probably something that we should even explicitly say, don't do it, right?
Yeah, I think there are a couple of, like, it hinders optimization because like you get unstable documents, and with requires you get a variable explosion. And if the schema design is not done prudently enough and you have the root fields non-nullable, you would even get into a situation where another result can kind of delete other batches, so to say, right? So this is not an optimal thing. It's just used in a lot of legacy gateways that I've seen in stitching. But like for us, we can call that out. That for the composite schema specification, I think the ideal thing we want to use is variable batching. And if that is not there, then we could use request batching. Because like there will be a lot of implementation that have that already.
Yeah.
Makes sense.
And that's also the two we gonna specify. Alias batching is kind of an accident.
It is.
But it's we just called it out here in the issue. But I think we all agreed that we focus on these two, request batching and variable batching, or the specification text. As to what lookups, we can define that, like when you think about it, also in kind of error resiliency, then with variable batching, we have separate executions, which still run with data loader optimization and stuff like that. But you have separate executions, so you don't bleed into other requests. like your errors. So a much better reason about that. So we should call that out. Maybe a non-normative node might be sufficient, but we can also specify it as a validation rule. So that
I think we need to, if we want to retain sort of our fundamental property of a federation, because otherwise you might end up in situations where a valid query is not actually something we can execute because of the require on one of the underlying fields.
Yeah, I think adding a validation rule that you're not allowed to return lists, and having a non-normative note about what batching algorithms make sense and why they make sense.
Yeah.
I think these two things are what we should add.
Okay, I made a note that we create for next week maybe a validation rule for that, and then we can have a look at that if that is sufficient. This would typically go on the subgraph validation rules. Basically, we can validate that very early. It's very simple. Basically, return types cannot be lists, must be object types or interfaces or unions. And can keys be lists? Technically, yes, right? It's a return type. Like, because you could have a list of, So it's the return type that is for us the important part here.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, practically also everything is a key. It just if you look at the schemas that we've seen, everything is a key if you can hack it around. So
yeah,
we should
so we
was wondering on that. So should we hint that ideally folks should be using a single ID keys, because that's like generally the best use case, right? That's what the relay does also for the simplicity, right? But like it's kind of like a hint. We suggest to use a single keys, but
I don't think we need to suggest a single key, but we need to suggest sort of keeping the complexity of your key
making this suggestion is definitely good. I'm not sure if it should belong into the spec, because one thing which is dangerous is if you make the statement too bold about just having an ID key, people will immediately get scared when they read this because they then say we cannot use it because we have more complicated keys. But even though it's just a suggestion, we have to be a bit careful about this.
Yeah, I think the suggestion we should put in there, which is also important for sort of retaining some of the other uses of lookup keys, is that it should only be the keys that are required to uniquely identify an entity and nothing else, because otherwise if you jeopardize caching, for instance. Like if we use the key as an entity key for caching, and you put sort of arbitrary information in there, which some people do because they use it as sort of a grab bag of information to pass around between subgraphs, then your caching is less efficient. You get cache misses where they should be used.
Kind of sounds like that we would need like some best practices suggestions next to the spec. I don't think that would actually fall into that.
Yes, so best practice if we can. Again, this is a good place where non-normative nodes can come in, which gives you at least the perspective we have, which are not binding. We have that in the spec also, like a lot, these yellow non-normative node boxes. What we can also do, what I thought about in the past, is a bit the decisions we do here. Sometimes we do them, but we forget the context around them. So maybe when we do such decisions, we have a separate document to the spec where we basically declare this is the decision of the group at this point, and then everybody can put some comments in there, and we preserve that a bit. And this gives everybody of us Like this can be just an additional document to the spec. I saw that with the Microsoft C# team, they kind of always comment on their decisions, and then you can read up later on that. Just as an idea.
Okay.
Yeah, it's because if you read up on why did we decide on that, and we had these discussions here, and I find the even in the main working group the notes do not capture that often very well, and it's easier to have a document where everybody can just chime in the text when they feel strongly about a decision. Okay, awesome. Anything on batching still?
No, I'm glad we're making such great progress. I mean, one question I would have is like how does the HTTP working group feel about this proposal? Like, is everyone on board? Are there questions or areas that we need to address?
Yeah, so I had a discussion a bit with a couple of them. I want to go into the working group at some point. I just want to make a bit more progress on the spec text. I'm doing that with Benji. He's the host of the working group, so he's managing it. So it's I'm feeding information back and forth with them. But I want to do, once we have the chapter, and I started really today to put the request batching stuff into one document now. Will take me maybe a couple of days, but then we should go 2 or 3 of us, or everybody who wants, over and present it also to them and get feedback. But it's not that it's a problem in general. It's more just to get everybody on board. At the moment, the main 3 people I saw working there is Martin Bonin. He's from Apollo.
Yep.
It's Benji and another guy. And like we have at the moment, just here's a proposal. We will change that a bit. Like Shane also, yeah, this the other guy. Shane also commented a bit on it. Yeah, and Benji also. So there's work on and discussions on there. But like once we have a bit more progress on that, the variable batching stuff is already quite okay. But once the full chapter is complete, we should do a formal proposal there. Like go in the working group and then explain also our reasoning around that.
Sounds good.
Okay. So so I am working at the moment also on this source schemas chapter where I have the current version, and that is the other thing, because I want to get that in. Just because people are looking at the repository and they see still the entity resolver directives, and I want to have a more updated version of the directives we have. And at the moment, like the lookup chapter is quite good. We can update that like with the validation rules, at least in the textual information here, that calls out that return types cannot be listed and stuff. But the rest of this is
if we're putting that in there, should we also specify that the result type should be nullable?
Yes, but this is more
it doesn't have
because
to, right?
it doesn't have
because batching. It can be no.
But it's a bit weird, because that would sort of say that every possible key like always returns.
Oh yeah, I mean it's semantically it's definitely not correct. I agree.
No.
But I wouldn't force it, because when you use variable batching, even if it's a nullability issue, it shouldn't break anything, right? It's not ideal.
No,
Maybe
and
could be a
I
warning.
think because we are trying to steer people towards like the right
Best
schema
practices.
design.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. It could be a warning.
We have this issue today with federation. It comes up a lot with customers that, like, oh, what happened? Like, I got an error because my entity resolver returned null for one of my things, right? And it's because your ID is invalid, so like you didn't pass the right ID, so it's like that's not our fault, right? It's like your system, but it comes up a lot with customers and distributed use cases.
Yeah,
It's
not
the standard.
necessarily bad ID, or it's more of a distributed problem that they're trying. Some system couldn't fetch something.
It's
Okay,
the classic response that you get. It's a data consistency problem. It's not a federation problem.
Should we formulate it as a should? You should implement them as nullable, but it's not a must. But it's very like the should is a very strong encouragement to do it.
I think we could just create a validation rule, and instead of erroring, we just warn, because we anyway need that. We have a few things which will end up being in warnings.
Yeah,
and I believe that there's more warnings that we should build in, things that do not break but would make sense. For example, if you share enums for input and output, could also be a warning.
Okay, I note that under the validation rules, so we add that there. But I think I will put it also as a text in here. You should separate from the validation rule. It's then in two places, but it's always good to repeat these things.
I mean, if you want to get specific on it, if we use the word should in the spec, that's probably a good indicator that we should also have a warning validation. Right.
Yes.
Yep.
Yeah. We have both. I'm just suggesting that we have in the section lookup, we call it already ours, a lookup should be nullable and must not return a list. Like kind of these guides, and then in the validation rule, we describe actually the rules around that. Sorry. You can see I'm still struggling a bit with the code. Okay, the other thing is I'm adding a bit text around the key directive. This is new, and I stole a bit from Apollo, the text, but mixed in a couple of additional suggestions. Would be good if somebody looked at that. Also at the shareable text.
Yeah, and I think one of the things we may want to clarify here, because that's been like confusing to people as well, is sort of the difference between a composite key and having multiple keys.
How do you mean?
Well, I mean, you can have multiple key directives, like specifying multiple keys.
Yes.
But you can also have multiple fields within a single key, and people sometimes confuse the two. So they put like two different keys in the same, two different key fields that should be sort of.
Yes, that's why I did this addition here. It's not perfect yet, because I also read it in the docs from Apollo. The key directive defines an entity unique key, which consists of one or more type fields, and that then each key, and then I added here each key directive annotated to a type represents a single unique key.
Yeah,
we can.
I mean, it's in there, but it's pretty dense. I think we may actually want to call it out explicitly, like, and give some examples.
Yes. Yeah, please add comments on that to this. It's this pull request. This guy here, number 30. So if you, because on this, these directives are a bit weak at the moment. Also shareable would be good to get feedback on. And yeah, these are also very weak at the moment. I started today to add more meat to that, but yeah, we can add examples. I think with a couple of examples, we already, yeah, that's actually good. Like we start with this simple sentence and then start like with lookup with a couple of examples. So this shows the multiple keys, multiple different keys, this is single key. So the people can put that into perspective.
Yeah.
Was just wondering, do we need a concept of non-resolvable keys here? Because well, we're using those in Federation, right? So I was wondering
What is the reason for that? What's the reason for that? I looked at it, but
there are cases where a certain subgraph, for instance, like returns objects of a certain entity. So, for instance, you have a like a blog post that returns that has an author field that returns a user, and it needs to specify sort of how it identifies those users. But it isn't able to like resolve every possible user. It just stores information for those authors, for those users that have authored blog posts, if that makes sense.
Yes. So a non-resolvable key is resolvable on a different subgraph, or what does
Well, no, what it's basically saying is whenever I return an object of this type, like these fields are the key fields. This is the key that
Yes.
like this subgraph uses to identify these objects. But you can't actually call into this subgraph with a key. And we have lookup now for the to specify. So this subgraph could simply not expose a lookup method for that key.
Yeah, that's what I thought, because then it's non-resolvable.
Yeah.
Like
but
if
this
you have
only-
a key combination. Go ahead, Pascal.
How does that work? Because if I add a key, if I add a field which is only resolvable from this subgraph, then it wouldn't work, right? So, for example,
No,
but
it's not the field that's non-resolvable. It's the key. So what it's
Yeah,
saying
so-
is that that there's no entity resolver for this key.
Yes,
Yeah,
but
so
the
you
but the
shouldn't be
question is,
jumping back to the subgraph, right, from another place. So if you start from the subgraph that has non-resolvable key, you can still have a valid query there, right? It's just that you cannot jump to that entity from any other subgraph because it doesn't really make sense, right? Since we have the lookups now as an explicit entry points, this wouldn't have a lookup that would actually basically make it.
but why do you need to specify the non? Because let's say in this blog post user entity, you have the I don't know, ID and name, and let's say this is a non-resolvable key. ID and name has to be resolvable from other subgraphs, because otherwise you would have, let's say name wouldn't be resolvable by any other subgraph. Then you would run into the issue that you could select name on a different entry point in user and you couldn't resolve it because it's non-resolvable. So that means that all
we
of
need
these
to detect that in the first place. Like that's what the non-resolvable is about.
Sure, but why do you even need to care about that there needs to be a key?
It's an user optimization. It's not something that Federation and Composition technically needs, because we can figure it out. But it's because what we're not, again, it's not, I think saying that it's not a resolvable key is not the best way to describe it. The best way to describe it is what we said before, is in the schema today with Apollo Federation, we have no way to indicate that this subgraph actually has an entity resolver, the __ resolve reference function that you'd implement in Apollo server. And if you don't have that, then like if you go, someone accidentally, let's say today this schema exists and it says, I have a blog and I reference the user type and I just have the key, right? And I just have the key there. So all I can return you is a reference to user. Today that exists like that. Then let's say someone accidentally tries adding the name field to this, right? And then they don't implement the reference resolver, right? Then this would start blowing up at runtime, not at composition time. And so what adding at resolvable false to the key directive allows you to do is allows you to explicitly indicate to the composition and to the router to say, hey, even if I add fields here, like never call me to resolve any fields because like I didn't implement it yet. So it's like it's a user developer optimization to say, like, I want to opt out of ever trying to be called here. And if I want to opt in to start being resolving some fields, I have to make an explicit action to remove that resolvable false.
But it's more specific than that, because if you add a field to that entity, let's say a name field, if let's say name is not a key field, that name field can still be resolved from this subgraph. It's
not
just
if you
that
put resolvable false.
No, it can, but only if you don't enter the subgraph through the key. If you go through like blog post author name, that would still work. But you wouldn't be able to jump from another subgraph to this subgraph using a user ID, for instance, and then ask for the name.
Yeah, so there is a documentation on our website that talks about referencing entity without contributing fields. So you want to I have a list of products, right? And I have some stub there that I can then jump to other graphs to get more data. But there's no point of going to this stub from the other one because it's just a key, right? Kind of thing.
But
I
why
think
can't you
little...
just why can't you just leave the key away on the subgraph, and then doesn't the key indicate that on this subgraph you can resolve the entity with the key?
No, it does multiple things. Like it also, for instance, marks those fields as shareable automatically. That's one of the things we currently do. But it's also just semantics. Like it actually specifies that like this subgraph identifies this type through this key, and it also marks that object type as an entity. And that has like other semantics. Stephen?
Yeah, I think the easiest way to understand it is, I think someone mentioned it, is that, sometimes a subgraph just doesn't have an entity resolver for a particular entity, even if that entity exists in their graph, because maybe they're just returning that entity. And we've seen that as well. That this happens sometimes in your graph, but it does seem like, though, with the lookup mechanism, that does provide a pretty natural way to make this obvious, because that has always seemed like something in Federation where it's until the non-resolvable, like, it's kind of ambiguous if something is just simply providing books as as leaves versus being able to be federated to.
Yeah, because the reference resolvers with lookups are now observable on the schema level. And before they were basically hidden in the implementation. But this means we don't actually need non-resolvable because we can already observe that.
We don't need that in this spec.
I agree.
It does point to maybe another issue about like backwards compatibility that we need to address somewhere. Like for Apollo Federation, we do still need to support the resolvable argument for existing subgraphs.
That's anyway what we should discuss on, like, can you add attributes or something to a directive that exists in your specific implementation, something like that.
Yeah,
we have to look at. Yeah, I noted that down, and I also noted down we need examples here. And should we call this out? Like, is it just naturally in the spec, the non-resolvability? I mean, observable it is, but should we call out the discussion somewhere that keys, that there are non-resolvable keys when there is no lookup for this key? Or is it not worth mentioning it?
I think it's worth putting in the lookup directive text that if you don't specify a lookup directive on the subgraph schema, then the router will never go and enter to try to look for those fields. Even if you do provide additional fields on the entity, by not having a lookup, the router will never go and ask you directly for those fields.
And composition hopefully failed.
That would be a failure from composition, right? If you hadn't.
Hopefully, otherwise something is broken.
Yeah, like
If
it seems
it's
obvious once you say it, but I think it's worth putting, writing it down.
Yeah.
okay, I'll put a note into lookup
So I was
on
wondering.
non-resolve.
So I like your suggestion, Michael, with that the extra documents like on action items or whatever, decision points or whatever.
Yeah.
So maybe there should be, I don't know, or an issue or discussion saying like the decision difference between federation non-resolvable key and GraphQL federation keys. That is basically,
Yes.
well, we don't need that mechanism because explicit lookups already handles that use case kind of thing.
Yeah, I will start this. I will add this document, and that could be one of our first entries, like the outcome of this discussion on non-resolvable keys, and then we can each have
It's
our
basically
say in that.
It's basically an FAQ. Like you can open it when you search something like what's non-resolvable in the composite schema specification. You can just open it and you know why. Doesn't
I
matter.
was thinking those would be separate documents for each one of the decisions, whatever points or whatever, so
Yeah.
it's easier to track those, but either one works. We could be even
Yeah,
a discussion. We can have a discussion group on the spec that talks about those, right?
Yeah, it's just that we have like our discussion points or important things a bit more persisted. So even when we come back to this point, can just read up. The idea actually came to me when Martin and I discussed in San Francisco how when new people enter this group, how do we not rediscuss every point that we already made a decision on? And that would be very easy to say, okay, you're entering this group as a new contributor, you want to be part of this group and help the spec. And we can say, okay, here you can read up basically on the decisions we have done and why we have done them. Then we don't relitigate everything, every little decision we ever did each time. Okay. That's awesome. Yeah, so I also noted down like for each of these, I will probably go just and collect a couple of examples so we get more meat to the directive, and then it's also more clear like what shareable does and why it does it. Okay, and then we should have a very good first version of the directives that we should merge, because then like people are looking at the current chapter and seeing the wrong state sometimes. And this would more reflect where we are when we have that master.
So follow-up question. We talked about doing the internal, right, and for the lookups stuff. Was that actually?
Yes. I also discussed that.
Okay.
There's internal and we have is inaccessible.
Inaccessible, yeah. Okay.
Yeah, but is it? Did I copy it in? Oh, okay, this is missing. I make a note. Because inaccessible, we will have inaccessible. I add that. And then we should be complete, directive-wise. And I think, let me just check, because internal is now described only in the combination with, you can see only in the combination with lookups. Internal directive is used to mark lookup fields as internal. That's a change from originally we discussed internal as inaccessible. And that is a change we did. So this is only valid if you have lookups, to hide lookups from the public schema. Or not hide lookups from the public schema, but kind of hide them as an entry point, right? That was the right way to put it. Okay, good. Then let's move on. We have 10 more minutes. Should we go?
I have already shared a screen about one specific validation rule. it's also good that Steven is here, because I want to use that because he has an opinion on it. The issue that we have in merging enums is that this can be a bit tricky depending on how the enum is used. At the moment, the specification of the I think I am.
No.
Or
No,
am I
not.
not? 1 second, I will try again.
I saw your screen.
Okay. There you go. Anyway, so the issue that we have with enums is that depending on how you use an enum, we cannot treat the enums differently, the same way. What we have now in the specification at the moment is the enums have to exactly match for an enum to be shared across different graphs. But it could be that in certain cases you do not want this behavior. For example, let's say you have two graphs, subgraph A and subgraph B, and both define user kind, and Azure AD user only live on subgraph A, and on subgraph B you have only Okta user. Could be two different profile services that you want to merge. Now on the gateway, what you actually want to have is you want to have a user kind which can be both. And this could be interesting, for example, when you have profiles, which could be on another subgraph. And on this subgraph, you have a user, and this user is either an Azure AD user, so comes from subgraph A, or is an Okta user, so comes from subgraph B. Now, the difficulty with this is that this works in output types, but it doesn't work in input types, because when you, for example, have a mutation, you see that you can, for example, have create Okta user, or you can have create a Azure AD user. But what also is possible, that because it's the same type, that you pass an Azure AD here, but this subgraph doesn't know about what an Azure AD user is, because it doesn't know that it exists. So naturally, what the spec at the moment does is it just says you have to match exactly, which is not like this. You would have to have an exact match, which doesn't work. Which doesn't work in this case. The other thing that you could do is how Apollo Federation does it at the moment, is you could use for inputs, for enums that are used as inputs, you can use intersection. For enums used as outputs, you can use unions. And for enums which are used in both cases, you can use the exact match. And there's two things that we have to consider. One is that I believe this use case exists, although it could be that it's a bit rare. So that's just the best example I could find, but I'll probably find something better for the specification. But these use cases exist. Now, the problem with accept match is that it's a bit hard to evolve. It's not non-evolvable. You can evolve the schema if you use inaccessible, then you can actually use it. Otherwise, it doesn't work. And the problems if we use this mixed approach is that it could be hard to understand and it could be hard to evolve, because depending on where you use the enum, the behavior completely changes. So it could be that you start using an enum also in an input, and then everything explodes.
It sort of it goes against our design principle of being explicit, I would say.
Yeah. The question is in which direction we want to go, because the validation rules and merge rules are much, much more complicated if we go into the mixed version of it. And if we say we anyway want to have an exact match, then we don't really have to worry about this, right? So we don't have to type it out.
An alternative might be to find a way to sort of mark enums as like input or output and enforce that.
There's also a problem with schema evolvability if we are too strict, right? Like, how do you introduce, if you have a shared enum across 2 or 3 subgraphs, how can you introduce a new item without breaking the composition?
You would mark it as, you would add it and mark it as inaccessible on one subgraph. And once everyone has added it, you can remove it.
Okay.
That's how
Okay.
it would work at the moment. So we need inaccessible anyway for evolvability, also in different
But how
cases.
would that work if that method already returns then this value? Like you mark it as
couldn't
you mark the enum as inaccessible. Yeah, go ahead.
if you do that, that would be a runtime error for the router, because the router supergraph wouldn't have that enum in its schema, and so you would be returning a value that wouldn't be valid against that GraphQL schema, and that would result in a runtime error.
That's a problem.
Okay.
Steven?
Well,
it's understandable because if
yes
you mark
and
something as
no,
inaccessible,
but
you shouldn't be able to return it.
yeah.
Yeah, but it's a runtime error.
Sure, but
I mean, if you
the
return
contract,
garbage
yeah.
from a resolver that doesn't match to an enum, that's a runtime error
Yeah.
too. Like, we're not, like,
yeah,
that's true.
Yeah, but you still could do it then in multiple deployments. Like first get everything everywhere in place. And the moment you remove inaccessible, you could now use it from the resolver level.
Stephen?
Yeah, the option 3, I guess, that I would propose is to use to merge using intersection in all cases. You know, if an enum is used as input, output, or both, to always allow merging as the intersection. And you know, the way it's done currently with the, you know, the mix of union, exact match, and intersection, I think is, you know, it's semantically better, but it is also just, you know, harder to understand, and, you know, issues if you want to, you know, change the usage of an enum and add it to an input, say.
Yeah.
And I think it would be safe to do the intersection. And the reason I say that is because the you know the problem of you know, with doing intersection on say an output would be for clients that they, you know, they could start seeing an enum value that they haven't recognized before. I think that's the main
That would be a
potential
runtime
problem.
failure on the router, right? Because it would get the value that cannot correspond back to enum.
And so if the router allows an enum value to pass through as an output that is not in the composite schema, that, you know, that maybe is behavior we need to specify. But basically, clients should already be built in such a way that they can handle a new enum value they haven't seen before, because this is necessary for, you know, to be able to add enum values in production in any case. So anyway, this is option 3. So I'd like to propose.
Okay, just one question. Like what I see with Relay, for instance, they are they can kind of put a stub thing in, like future value, where they basically, if anything new comes from the server, they would put that in that case. Is do I explain that right, Pascal? Because I'm not the front end guy.
Yes,
but I remember that
but it's only based on types. So this value will never be there. It's only that you build your switch cases that there is always a default. That's how we can enforce it.
We do the same thing for our native client CodeGen. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean,
I was
one.
just thinking the gateway could have could put or in the schema such a value.
But then you would have to do that for
maybe
every enum. I don't think that you want that in your schema. I actually need to drop on time.
Don't worry.
Yeah, don't worry. I will create
this. It's be a good topic to pick up.
Yeah, I will create the discussion on GitHub for it, and then we can follow it up there. Yeah. One thing about the intersection is that this kind of is this possible? Can you add a directive to an enum member?
Yes, you can.
Yes.
Yeah.
You can.
So
that's how an
that would Yeah, that would be more correct in terms of behavior, right? Because you explicitly mark it as inaccessible. So when you return it, you know that it's inaccessible, so it's your own fault. So it would make things more semantically correct rather than just using the intersection. Because with the exact match, you would also use the intersection if you specify it as inaccessible. So it might be that semantically it's more correct to actually do this.
Yeah, we can continue this discussion on GitHub and also next week. And
sounds good.
maybe if you get this discussion started, Pascal, on GitHub, then we can already put a couple of ideas in. Awesome.
All right.
Bye, everyone. Very good meeting.
Yeah.
Bye.
Thanks, y'all.